Welcome to the paranormal, the strange, and the unknown, as we take you to a place just beyond midnight. Beyond Midnight Podcast with your hosts, Paul Steele and AJ Doyle. Hey, welcome to Beyond Midnight. This is AJ. I'll be joined shortly by Paul, my co-host. Tonight we have a very special guest, Mr. Stan Gordon. This episode brought to you by Six Little Paws, with a large selection of unique and custom handmade items from reclaimed wood. Check them out at facebook.com/sixlittlepaws or click the link in the description below. Beyond Midnight theme written and performed by Adam Christian. Click the link below or check him out at adamchristian.bandcamp.com. Welcome back to Beyond Midnight. Paul joins me now along with Stan Gordon. Stan Gordon has been researching UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, and other mysterious events in Pennsylvania since 1959. Since then, he has been involved with the investigation of thousands of unusual incidents. He is the primary investigator of the 1965 UFO crash incident that occurred near Kecksburg, PA. Stan has been taking calls on UFO sightings and other strange reports from the public since 1969, and he continues to receive unusual reports on a regular basis. He is the producer of the award-winning documentary Kecksburg: The Untold Story. Stan is the author of 3 books: Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook, Really Mysterious Pennsylvania, and his latest book, Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures, which was published in August of 2015. He appears frequently on radio and television programs discussing his research on these topics. During 2014, Stan appeared on numerous radio and TV shows. He was seen on the Close Encounters series on the Science Channel, Monsters and Mysteries in America on the Destination America Channel, Monumental Mysteries on the Travel Channel, In Search of Aliens on H2, and UFO Conspiracies on the Science Channel. He has also appeared on a number of other TV programs and radio shows, including Coast to Coast, Midnight in the Desert, and Podcast UFO. Please welcome Stan Gordon.
Hi, Stan. I want to thank you for joining us tonight on the Beyond Midnight podcast. You have a video for sale on your website, stangordon.info. That's STANGORDON.info, called Kecksburg: The Untold Story. For those of our listeners out there that have never heard of Kecksburg or may not be familiar with what happened there, could you give us a little bit of background on that story?
Yeah, that was a documentary I produced a number of years ago. It's very, very detailed and gets into a lot of really amazing information that I have covered over the now it's 51 years of research. Of course, it was many years ago that I produced that. It goes back to that famous incident that happened December 9th of 1965 out in Westmoreland County, about 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, in the little village of Kecksburg, between Greensburg and Mount Pleasant. I was 16 years old at the time. I already had an interest in UFOs going back to when I was 10 years old in 1959, and how it became the really interesting account that came to my attention was I was tuned into KDK radio in Pittsburgh that night because they had a radio show called Contact, and the host of the show was Mike Levine, and he had a special guest coming on whose name is well known to some people who are interested in these type of subjects. His name was Frank Edwards, who had written some books on unusual happenings, and I wanted to tune in to listen to what he had to say. Of interest was the fact that pretty much the entire radio show was now focusing on this breaking news story, this brilliant fireball that was seen from Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And whatever the object was, apparently came in over the greater Pittsburgh area about 4:47 p.m., just as it's getting dark in the area. Multitudes of people observed the object, and they were calling the police and the radio and TV and news agencies to report what they were seeing. And as the evening went on, the talk program was interviewing eyewitnesses. They were talking to reporters. They were reading the breaking newswire stories about the observation of the object. And it just got more and more intriguing as the evening went on. And later that evening on KDK TV, late Bill Burns was breaking in with a live report that the military was arriving in the Kecksburg area to search for an unidentified flying object. And I wasn't able to go out there yet. I wasn't driving yet, and I had no way to get out to the scene. But early the next morning, I went to the local newsstand and picked up all the local papers, and it was a headline story. And one of the local papers, the Greensburg Tribune Review, had two editions. The late edition had a number of reports, including one that said searchers failed to find object, and it indicated that officially there was a search for the object. It continued to the early morning hours, but absolutely nothing was found. And officially they were saying it was just people's imagination. They had seen a bright meteor in the sky, but nothing had fallen to the ground. Well, after multitudes of years of research, I was able to learn a lot about the case. I've interviewed hundreds of people who were involved in the case now. And what I found out was that soon after the object fell, some of the local people and then later volunteer firemen came into the scene, and they went down to the water ravine, and they came across a large metallic acorn-shaped object, big enough for a human to stand inside of and move around. It was about 10 to 12 feet or more in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter. It looked like one solid piece of metal, kind of an off-gold bronze color, shaped like a big metallic acorn. Interestingly, there's no weld marks, no rivets, no seams, no fuselage, no windows that they could see. On the raised-up back of the acorn shape, witnesses reported seeing some type of markings that looked more like symbols. And one witness spent a lot of time in the libraries trying to research what those may have been. He said the closest thing he could recall was they looked similar to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. And what I found out later was the fact that the object went out on the military flatbed tractor trailer around 1 o'clock in the morning, and it went to Lockbourne Air Force Base near Columbus, Ohio. I interviewed one of the air policemen who was a part of that security team, and later others confirmed the story to me, that the flatbed truck and the object came into Lockbourne Air Force Base. They backed into a hangar. They set up a security perimeter around it, and they were given a shoot-to-kill order to anybody approach that hangar without their proper authority. And I also learned it didn't stay on the base much longer. It continued on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. And later, people who people who were at the base were able to later confirm to me exactly what building the object went to. Now, where it's at today, of course, we have no idea. And, of course, there's a lot of speculation as to what this object was. There's been many, many theories on that. But it's a very intriguing case, and it's still one of our local unsolved mysteries.
Stan, the similarities between this and Roswell with the hieroglyphs on it, with the government claiming that it was something that, it obviously was something, it being transported immediately to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton. I mean, it made a stop in Columbus. It's just eerily similar to that case, is it not?
Well, yeah, and interestingly, of course, Wright-Patterson would be the location that something that had been recovered and needed study and analyzed would have been sent to, because a couple things. One, during that time period, it was the home of Air Force Project Blue Book, when the government was still officially investigating UFO sightings. So Project Blue Book was headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The other reason was it was the home of the FTD, the Foreign Technology Division, which was basically the technical backbone of the Air Force. So if, for example, we recover a Soviet satellite, it would be taken there to be examined and, to learn about that technology. And if anything else unusual fell from the sky, that's where likely would have been taken. We understand that the Roswell debris went to Wright-Patterson, and we understand there may be other not well-known cases where other materials may have been sent to Wright-Patterson as well. So that was a likely location for this thing to end up going to.
Stan, there is actually a model of this. Is there not a life-size replica of this somewhere near Kecksburg?
Yeah, actually, this was the mock-up that was made for the Unsolved Mysteries TV show when we did that program back in 1990. And it's a permanent display. It's out there at Kecksburg. You can go to the Kecksburg Volunteer Fire Department, their grounds out there where they have their truck stations. And they actually have a little gift shop where you can buy some interesting souvenirs and get something to eat in there. But they have the object at permanent display. And every year in July, we have the annual Kecksburg UFO Festival, which has become a huge event. Thousands of people from all over the country come into it. It's free. It's Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. Saturday is the main day with the parade and events going all day long. And then Sunday, we have our free Sunday afternoon UFO Bigfoot conference, which is free to the public. I tell people get there very early. We get massive crowds, and most of the time you can't get everybody in. So if you want to see, get there early. And there'll be more information on, of course, into next year when we start getting closer to that date.
Hey, isn't it funny, though, that the celebration in memory of the Kecksburg incident actually took, it takes 3 days longer for the actual celebration than it took for the government to swoop in and get that thing out of there. It's unbelievable. One thing I noticed, Stan, about I actually saw a picture of the replica on the internet. It looks a lot like the Nazi bell. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, the Glock, and it's one of numerous theories that have been brought forth as to what this object was. And in fact, I mean, back in the 60s, there were a number of Soviet and U.S. other space devices that looked somewhat similar. But because something looks similar, you've got to look at the data about each individual probe, their capabilities. Whatever this object was, it was seen over a large area. It was moving relatively slowly. It may change in direction along its trajectory. And those people who saw it come down to go into the woods that afternoon said it did not come down at a fast, high rate of speed. Like, for example, if you had a reentry of space debris or meteor, it came in almost like it made almost like a controlled landing. I call it a crash landing because we know it crashed through the trees and knocked over and damaged trees, but it fell intact. It was completely intact on the ground. And nobody ever saw any parachutes. But the Glock is one of many, many theories that have been proposed, and it's an interesting theory. Depends who you talk to. The Nazis reportedly were working on some type of anti-gravity device or time machine. My understanding is, and I'm no expert on the bell, but I've talked to people who claim they are, and they say that whatever it was not a flying vehicle, a space vehicle. Whatever this object was that fell at Kecksburg was maneuvering through the sky. And as far as I'm aware, there's no evidence that the Nazis ever were able to get that project to a reality, to a working project. But again, I keep an open mind to all possibilities till we have the evidence. And there's so much more of the case, again, than we have time to get into. And maybe at some future time we'll talk again. But one thing I bring up in my lectures is that in more recent years, we've got some pretty good information that someone or something may have been inside of the object. That's a whole different aspect of the case.
AJ, do you want to ask your follow-up question?
The main question that I have, Stan, is, this has a lot of similarity to something that happened in just right around us here in Pittsburgh, down the Monongahela River in 1956, in January, with the B-25 that went into the river probably a stone's throw from where PJ and I grew up. And the interesting thing about this is that this flight was coming from Nellis in Nevada, and it was headed to Harrisburg. And it crashed into the Mon River. That night it crashed in the river. There was a little blurb in the paper that says, hey, there was something that crashed in the river, but after that, nobody saw a plane recovered. Some people have talked about seeing a flatbed truck come in and take the plane away. There were 6 people that had survived the crash, and what kind of speculation is there as to what might have been on that plane?
Well, I guess that's probably one of the biggest mysteries. What was the plane carrying?
Difficult to say one way or another that they're not connected.
Well, there's a lot of events, that people sometimes try to link, but you've got to have the evidence to be able to do it. There's always a lot of theories out there about different cases, but I'm not sure what year. If you're talking about the B-25, actually it happened in 1956.
Right.
Roswell was 1947, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Right. The Roswell case was back in the 40s.
Right.
Kecksburg was 1965.
Right.
Okay.
But they were all. They were all Cold War. They were all different. Different eras, but we're still fighting, still a lot of secrecy going on there. So was it military? Was it
right?
Is it possibly something that was alien in nature? So it's just something, especially being from the area. It's something we've always grown up hearing about, but never weren't around to see it.
Right, and there are multitudes of other cases a lot of people are not even aware of. All kind of strange things were happening back at that time period all over the Pittsburgh area, and they weren't as well known, but some of them were probably even more unusual. And, for example, I was down at the Mothman Festival a few weeks ago. I spoke down there because this was the 50th anniversary of the sighting of the Mothman creature, but that was really focusing on the event that started back in November of '66. But a lot of people didn't know that there apparently was a very similar creature incident going on in the Pittsburgh area at the same time, but it was never publicly talked about. I had heard rumors about it, and but anyhow, apparently something was taking place and involved quite a number of people.
Dan, you have is this a new book that you have, Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot?
Well, that's actually my second book. It's called Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Case Book. And that talks about the massive wave of UFO and Bigfoot sightings that occurred here in Pennsylvania in 1973 and 74. It was just an amazing time to live through and to be involved in. It's some of the weirdest cases ever documented we uncovered during that time period, and it gave us a completely different perspective on Bigfoot and what we're dealing with and why there's no bodies of these things. It just was an amazing time.
Without stealing thunder from your book, one story that caught my attention about Sasquatch in Pennsylvania, I'd never even heard of this, but I fish a place called the Royal Hannah Creek, which is very close to where you live, I believe. And I went on there just to search what the different species of fish are in that creek. And the first thing that pulls up whenever I type Royal Hannah species is a Royal Hannah Sasquatch story. I believe the man's name was Sam Sherry. Do you know this story? Are you aware of this?
Yeah, in fact, I'm very much aware because I was the first investigator to interview him and go out to the scene where he was. He was down there at the right down in Sleepy Hollow, which is between Latrobe and Ligonier. Mm-hmm. He was night fishing, and guy had a lot of experience as an outdoorsman. And that particular evening, he was out there fishing, and just to make the story short, this 7-8 foot tall creature came up out of the woods and came within a few feet of him, and he had a very, very good look at it. Pretty upset over it. There was a strong odor, as I recall, with that case. But as I also remember, that was a little different. He said this thing, the hair on it, there were lots of patches of hair missing off the body, big patches of hair that were gone. And it was scratching itself terribly, almost like it had mange. And that's rarely do you hear those kind of reports, but I've heard a few other reports as well. But there have been other night fishermen and others even in daylight over the years who have reported sightings of these creatures all through that area, but also along the Royal Hannah Creek. And we've also had some very interesting footprints show up, which we have casts of over the years on the general area. But there's a lot of sightings, especially along the Chestnut Ridge. And the Chestnut Ridge is a mountain range that's 100 miles long and goes from Preston County, West Virginia, to Westmoreland, Fayette, Indiana County. And year after year, we continue to receive Bigfoot reports, including this year, which has been very active with reports right up through the last few weeks and months, with UFOs and Bigfoot and other strange creature reports, has been very, very active since March of this year. But historically, especially going back to those events of 73 and 74, there was a lot of sightings along the Dairy side of the Chestnut Ridge outside of Latrobe. And luckily, well, this all started in the summer of 73 with all the Bigfoot activity, but the UFO activity started January 1st of 73 and continued to the last day of the year. There were hundreds and hundreds of UFO reports coming in. And a lot of these were things that a lot of them were cases we could not find an explanation for. Many of them were not lights in the sky, but many were low-level observation of large structured craft. So they had these big metallic cigar-shaped objects and triangles and discs and objects pacing cars and hovering over highways, landing reports. I mean, it was just an incredible time period. But the Bigfoot sightings, when they started, this went on for weeks and months. And many of the sightings of these creatures were in daylight. Sometimes there was more than one creature seen together. And interestingly, some of these were at extremely close range. It wasn't like you see on some of the TV shows where in the dark they see a shadow half a mile away and they get all excited. These were extremely close daylight observations. Some cases they walked out in front of cars, so they're like 5 feet away from the witnesses. And they got very good descriptions of what they saw. And many people saw them. I mean, we had reports from hunters and police officers and people from all walks of life who were reporting these things. And you got to remember, back in that time period, there was no cell phones, no internet. It was a whole different time. But in 1970, I had founded my first of 3 volunteer research groups, and luckily we were already pretty well organized because we're investigating cases 24 hours a day around our regular jobs. And by 1973, we had taken over the state of Pennsylvania. And the group I had back then, the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group, was kind of unique in that most people involved had some type of specialized background. They were scientists or engineers or technicians or researchers of some type. We had police officers. We had former military intelligence people. We had a lot of specialists. And we were out there day and night working on these cases. And as time went on, as more reports were coming in during that wave, some very weird things began to come to our attention, which gave us a whole different viewpoint on what Bigfoot might be.
What do you think Bigfoot is, Stan? Because I think you have a theory.
Well, to really give you the theory, and we need to talk a little bit about some of the incidents that happened, because they're so bizarre, and I can tell you, if I hadn't been involved in this personally and some of the investigators I had with me and hadn't documented these things at the time, it would be very hard for me to believe. But more and more of these type of cases have been showing up not only in Pennsylvania, but in many parts of the country and even other parts of the world. Similar type reports are showing up. And what I'm referring to is the fact that, so going back to 73, as all these reports are coming in, and back in those days, a lot of the initial reports came to the police departments because people were afraid. And what we initially always figured was some type of unknown animal, an unknown primate. The strange reports were coming in from widespread areas. For example, we would have teams go out to some location where Bigfoot was seen. We would find trails of footprints that would suddenly stop and disappear. But the ground conditions were good. There should have been more tracks. They were just gone. Other weird things began to happen, and we began to see a pattern. For example, we would get a report of a UFO sighting in a particular area, and within minutes to hours to days later, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then we had amazing cases where we had a UFO and Bigfoot seen together at the same time and place. And, there were numerous reports from widespread areas, and that's what I talk about in my Silent Invasion book. And without getting into complete long detail, because this case alone is so bizarre and very long, but October 25th of 73, outside of Uniontown, Fayette County, there were a lot of UFO reports coming on my hotline. And anyhow, I got a call from the state trooper who had just came back from investigating this incident. It involved 15 people in the area who saw this barn-sized big red ball of light about 100 feet off the ground descending towards the pasture. To make the story short, one fellow, the older fellow, two young boys went up to investigate. As they saw this thing coming down, the fellow went to his dad's farm where this was happening and grabbed a 30-06 and some ammunition. And anyhow, the story involved this UFO that was landed on the ground about 100 feet or more in diameter. When it was on the ground, it was actually seen about 250 feet away from these fellas, but it was a big white dome making this high-pitched whining noise. And 75 feet away, there was a fence line, a barbed wire fence, and these two tall Bigfoot-like creatures, one about 8 foot tall, the other about 7 foot tall, were slowly walking towards these three guys. And anyhow, the whole thing was the guy did shoot at them with some live ammunition, mainly the largest creature. It apparently had no effect on it, and it's just a very long, strange story what took place. And interestingly, during this whole event, the object in the field vanished and disappeared. And when the state trooper arrived on the scene, he said the area where the object had been on the ground or right above it was self-luminescent and glowing about 100 feet or more in diameter. He said it was bright enough if he had a newspaper, he could have read the newspaper from the light coming off the glowing area. And that's just some of the features of the story.
AJ, do you have a follow-up? I feel like I'm hogging all the time.
No, I really think that that's interesting, just to see where, you know, the thought of how you're tying the two together. And it's really interesting that there's such, you know, why has Western Pennsylvania especially, and maybe it's just because of growing up here and hearing these stories, but why does it seem that Western Pennsylvania is such a hotbed for both UFO and Bigfoot activity?
Well, historically, it's always been like this. I mean, going back to the Native Americans talking about these events in Pennsylvania, strange things. The newspapers in the 1800s talk about it. These things have been going on for years and years. And then you got to remember, my hotline was set up in 1969. It's still as busy today as it was back in those days. And now through the internet, I get a lot of reports as well. But this was one of the only places in the country that you had research people who actually went out and investigated cases, and you could report sightings. And many people over the years recognized that they could report seeing something. So that's probably also a reason why we got more than normal reports for many years.
Right. So tell me a little more about the Sasquatch that you've been seeing over in Armstrong, Fayette County areas. Is that the one that you've been writing about the most recently, right?
Well, I'm just talking about some of the more recent sightings.
Right.
But I want to answer your question. You did ask me a question what I thought Bigfoot was. And I started to tell you about a couple of these UFO incidents back in the 70s. And I always wondered, and I just like the skeptics, you know, Bigfoot is real. If these are normal animals, something just doesn't make any sense, because these things have been seen for years and years all across Pennsylvania, throughout our country, many parts of the world, and nobody's ever found a body by now. Something just doesn't make any sense. And then as those events in the 70s continue, even weirder things begin to come to our attention. And we had the one case that convinced me that there was more to this than a flesh and blood explanation. And this occurred back in 1974, on February 6th of 1974, way up in the mountains again, up around Ohiopyle, up in Fayette County again, which again has a lot of history of these reports. And anyhow, this involved a woman who lived deep in the mountains in a little cabin home. She was sitting on her porch. Rather, she was in her living room watching TV when she heard a commotion on her porch. She had some cans of pop, some empty pop cans out there, and someone was knocking the pop cans around. She had a previous problem with a pack of wild dogs, and she figured the dogs are probably back. So she thought, I'll grab my shotgun and I'll shoot over their head and scare the dogs away. So she loads one chamber of her shotgun. She walks over to the wall to turn on the light for the outside porch light. She goes to the front door, opens up the door, and walks out. There's no dogs, but only a few feet in front of her, it's this huge, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature, about 7, 8 foot tall, dark hair, with the arms straight up over its head like it's surrendering, and she fires right into it. and she said there's this bright flash like a flash on a camera, and it disappears right in front of her. And then her in-laws, 100 feet away, heard the gunshot, and they called and asked her what she's shooting at. She tried to tell them. Her son-in-law grabs his gun, his sidearm, starts walking up towards the house, and he said he's surrounded by 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, starts shooting at him randomly, runs into the cabin, and there's this large glowing object hovering over the woods at the same time. That was one among other cases that convinced me that we're dealing with something that's not a normal animal. And in fact, I'm speculating more and more, and I know I'm not the only one now, that we're dealing with something, for a better term, that might be interdimensional. We don't know all the science behind it yet, but science is beginning to look into different aspects now that might be able to explain this. But it seems that under certain conditions, and I found this years ago, it's still going on today, that many close Bigfoot encounters, low-level UFO sightings, others creature encounters commonly occur in the vicinity of energy sources. So they're seen around gas wells, gas lines, power plants, high-tension power lines, radio towers, reservoirs, railroad tracks, various types of energy sources. And it seems as though under certain conditions they can come into our physical reality, they can look physically solid, they can leak physical evidence, and then they're gone. They come and they go. And that's just one theory, and I think more and more from the numerous cases that I've been looking into, and I know others out there as well, that this is a very, very unusual theory, but it's something we have to keep an open mind about, because there's more to this than any of us realize and understand.
Right. Well, that would certainly explain why the such a large amount of sightings happen in the western Pennsylvania area. So I think that there is definitely some credence there, I think, to your theory.
And again, it's not just Pennsylvania, but I get reports of this from all over our country and people from outside of the country. And this has been going on for years and years and years. But I started writing about this back in the 70s. And, a lot of people in the UFO field who believe that UFOs are extraterrestrial, and I keep an open mind to all possibilities, because I've said for years, I believe there's more than one origin to the unknown category of UFOs. But the people in the UFO field don't want to associate UFOs with Bigfoot, and those in the Bigfoot field who believe in some type of unknown primate don't want to connect Bigfoot with UFOs. But more and more reports are coming in, and more people in more recent years are beginning to get a little more open-minded now, are beginning to ask the same questions, like, where's the bodies of Bigfoot if it's an animal?
Stan, the story you just told us about the shooting of these creatures reminded me early of, I'm sure you've heard of it, Skinwalker Ranch, which I believe is in Utah.
Yes.
Very, very similar to that, where you have multiple phenomenon. You have UFOs, you have Sasquatch, you have shape-shifting animals that are there, get shot and just disappear, poof, right in front of your eyes.
Yep.
Very, very similar.
That's right.
Yeah, so I don't know, AJ, do you have anything else? I think we're going on about 40 minutes here that we've stolen of Stan's life.
I mean, I do. I could sit. We could sit here and talk all night. I know, PJ. We've talked just a couple weeks ago about my whole theory of extraterrestrials and the fact that they're not necessarily from another planet or another galaxy, but from another time, and they're actually from here, where they're they're time travelers that are coming back to observe, to see what led to the life they have now, what led to their apocalypse. And that that's just something, that's what I've always kind of developed that theory. And this was long before reading on the internet or listening to the radio. I was just probably 10 or 11 or 12 years old and just thinking about these things. So it's not something that I've read about and developed a theory from that. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I want to stress, I'm not suggesting that Bigfoot is an alien from an extraterrestrial UFO. Because once again, we don't know what those objects and lights are that people are seeing in conjunction with these sightings. Is Bigfoot attracted to the UFO or vice versa? Are they part of the same phenomena? There's many unanswered questions we just don't have.
I mean, can we agree that they're probably not weather balloons and swamp gas?
Well, there are a lot of reports that turn out to be weather balloons and misidentification of lights on aircraft and meteors and, Chinese lanterns, but there's a lot of cases every year we could not easily dismiss.
Right.
And you mentioned a few minutes ago about Armstrong County and around the Pittsburgh area, and yes, in recent weeks and months, there's been a lot of Bigfoot UFO activity and other weird reports coming in. I have, if you go to my website, stangordon.info, I have a short list of some of the cases on there right now people can look at, but there have been many reports. Two of the Bigfoot sightings were unusually interesting. One was April 17th near West Newton. In the evening, a woman was riding down the dark road when she notices to her right a figure coming off the road up into the main road, right as she's pulling up to it. She stops to slow down to look, and here's a 7-foot-tall, hairy creature with glowing eyes staring in the window at her, and she was very upset. And the other case was May 10th outside of Fairchance up in Fayette County. The whole report you can read on the website. And this was a pouring down rain, 2 men in a car on a very rural road. This huge, hairy creature ran out in front of the car, stood in the middle of the road, and looked at the guys in the car. And these guys actually very slowly pulled their car up to it and bumped it, and it turned around and put its hands right on the front of the car and then ran off into the woods. So we had two cases where these things came very close to cars in recent months.
That's
Absolutely incredible.
Yes.
I actually had an experience on the Loyal Hannah Creek that I want to share, but I want to share it on the next. Dan, if we could be honored to have you on sometime in the future.
I'll be glad to come back again.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to share my strange Loyal Hannah experience. That, yeah. I don't even know if I told you about that, AJ. Did I?
I don't think you did. So I think it'll be
wait till
great
you
to
hear
be able
this.
to hear it, both of us hear it. So.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep it to myself.
Also, coming up next weekend, I'll be October 14th and 16th is the Fort Ligonier Days, and I will be at the Second Chapter Bookstore all weekend signing books, and I'll also be in the parade. And so people stopping up to tell them to stop by and say hello.
Right.
AJ, do you have any more questions for Mr. Gordon?
I don't right now, Stan. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us for a little bit tonight, and we really appreciate it.
Dan, I just want to thank you once again for being on our show. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you over the last 45 minutes. And everyone, please do not forget to check Stan out at Fort Ligonier Days, October 14th through 16th. He will be in the parade on the 15th, and he'll be signing books at Second Chapter Bookstore all weekend long. So please stop by and check him out.
Thanks for having me on. It's very nice being on your program.
It's an absolute honor, Stan. Thank you so much.
All right, good night.
Thank you.
Good night.